Until 5 minutes ago, Dr. Spence didn't know that I worked for him, but he hadn't fired me yet, so I guess I can introduce him. Dr. Aaron Spence assumed the leadership of the public schools June 23rd of last year. As superintendent, he oversees 86 schools and almost 69,000 students, as well as administrative support functions for the school division. He's a local guy, proud graduate of Green Run High School, and I remember in the day, you were there, it was the school. He returned to Virginia from having several recently served as superintendent in Monroe County Public Schools in North Carolina. We'll forgive you for that. During his tenure there, he launched a division with Digital Learning Initiative, impressive, designed to put a digital device, such as a laptop or tablet, in the hands of every student and teacher. If I'm not mistaken, we've got that same project going in our system, isn't it? Before his service in Monroe County, he was Chief High School Officer of Houston Independent School District, the 8th largest school. How many students are there?
A little over 200,000.
Wow. This must be a piece of cake for you here. And where he helped to decrease the district dropout rate and increase the graduation rate to historical high. He began his career in Virginia as a French teacher, photojournalism teacher, and proudly in Virginia he served as assistant principal and later principal of Henrico County Public Schools. He served as chief academic officer and director of the curriculum and instruction for Chesterfield County. Please stand and welcome our speaker.
Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's nice to be here. I am a fellow former Rotarian in North Carolina, so it's nice to be back. I was trying to figure out what the fun find was. It took me a few minutes to realize that was Happy Dollars. So I was like, okay, that's nice. I like that. I like that better than Happy Dollars, actually. So I guess I have about 20-25 minutes. So what I'm going to try to do is talk a little bit about public education context. This is a Norfolk, Virginia Beach chapter. Is that correct? So I'll focus only a little bit on Virginia Beach, mostly on public education. And leave some time for questions, if that's okay. So, if you've heard me speak before, you're going to hear me say some things that I say, because anytime I get a captive audience, I do like to set the context for public education a little bit. And I like to start off by asking a question. So, how many of you have heard that our public schools are failing children? And how many of you have heard somebody say that? Not you've said that, I'm sure you've never said that, but so some of you have heard that. If you pay attention to the political campaigns, if you pay attention to the climate, and it's starting to get a little bit better finally after a decade, but for about the last decade, people were saying a lot of things about public schools failing children, and it was really interesting when I was in North Carolina as a superintendent. There was an election. By the way, just if you think I'm making this up, I Googled public schools failing in America one time not too long ago. I got 26.3 million hits on that. And of course, you know, the way Google works, not all of those are relevant, but the first 3 or 4 pages were all these sort of incredibly derisive articles about public education and what public education is doing to children. When I was in North Carolina, there was an election, and I'm not politicizing this, so I'll just say that one party took all of the House and the Senate and the governorship all in one fell swoop. And there was a reporter, and they were talking to the Speaker of the Senate, and they said to the senator, sir, now that you all have control of everything, what are you going to do? And he said, we're going to do 2 things. I thought this was really interesting. He said, we're going to do 2 things. We are going to fix the tax system in North Carolina, and we are going to fix the dysfunctional system of public education. Now, that is a powerful word. If you think about the word dysfunctional, I mean, it literally means does not function. And the reporter said to the senator, why is that your platform? And he said, because 20% of the children in North Carolina are not graduating from high school, and that is completely unacceptable. And he was right. 20% of the children in North Carolina were not graduating from high school. The question the reporter did not ask, and the question that I want to challenge you all with today is, when has it ever been better? And so I want to talk a little bit about that. I think we have to put what's happening in public schools in context. So I want to read you a quote. I want to read you a quote, and then I want to share with you some statistics. This is an interesting quote. How many of you have heard somebody say something like this? I know of no college or university that doesn't have to offer most or all of its freshmen courses in remedial English, beginning mathematics, beginning science, and beginning foreign languages. Consequently, we give 2 or 3 years of college courses and the rest is high school work. How many of you have ever heard college people talk about that? We got to remediate all our children when they get so our schools don't know what they're doing. That's an interesting quote. It was by Theodore Green. He's a professor at Princeton University. The interesting part about that quote is that was said in 1946.
Wow.
And I want to, and I share that with you to set the stage for this next conversation, because I want to talk about what was happening in 1946. So let's talk about the 1940 census. In the 1940 census, and I just talk at your table for a second, what do you think the percentage of Americans with a high school diploma was in 1946? Just talk at your table for 1 second, see if you can come up with the answer. All right, let's shout out a couple of answers. What do you think?
Less than 40%.
50, less than 40, 40, 50. This is great. It's like the Price is Right. Go lower, go lower.
70.
25%. 25% of Americans in 1940 had a high school diploma. To put that into further context, what do you think the percentage of Americans with any high school experience at all was in 1940?
Probably 35%. 53.
40%. 40%. So, in 1940 America, when this quote was said about high schools not preparing children for upper level learning.
Just after the Depression.
Just after the Depression. And there were, by the way, this is not value judgment on my part, I'm just giving you some facts. There were lots of things that you could do without a high school diploma in America in 1940. We were an industrial nation. You could work in the factory. You could get an apprenticeship. The military would take you without a high school diploma. There were a lot of things that you could do without a high school. And by the way, we were still largely an agrarian society in 1940, and so most folks were still working on farms. Things have changed rather dramatically. So let's just talk about today, so to set this sort of context for this conversation. So today, what do you think the percentage of Americans with a high school diploma is?
60%.
80, 85.
It's 85% nationally. 85% nationally. What do you think today the percentage of Americans with any experience in high school is?
90%.
It is 99.1%.
Wow.
So the holdover from 1940 is that like the last 0.9%, right? Because in the 1960s, America made a commitment to high school education. And they said it's imperative that every child go to high school. And we began to see the writing of mandatory attendance laws. And then everybody went to high school, right? So all of us in the room know that everybody went to high school. So I give you those facts to sort of put public education in context. Over the course of the last half century plus now, we have seen a rapid increase in the number of children going into our public schools, and particularly our high schools. 60% more of the population is now in school. And 60% more of those young people are graduating from school. And actually what's interesting about that, in 1940, what do you think the percentage of young people who went to college was? 3%.
Wow.
So of the 25% who actually graduated out of the 40% who actually went to high school, only 3% of them were showing up uneducated. And so today, that number stands at 40%. 40% of young people go to college. So things have shifted pretty dramatically, and that shift is based on a shifting expectation. And that expectation is that every child be educated at a high level, every child graduate from high school. So the senator wasn't wrong. 20% in North Carolina, the graduation rate was at 80%. 20% of the students were not graduating, but the senator wasn't really talking genuinely about the context of that. that North Carolina was doing a better job educating more children than it had ever done in its history. The joke in education is that in 1950, in the 1940s, even in the 1960s, the dropout problem was not figuring out how to keep children in school, it was figuring out who to get out of our schools. Today, the dropout problem is we expect every child to complete high school. And so when we have dropout percentages of 1 and 2%, which is what we have in Virginia Beach, we don't think that's good enough. We work harder to find those young people and bring them back into our schools. So I say all of that to make the case that public education is not failing America's children. In today's context, we are the only nation in the world which aspires to teach every child at a high level and graduate every child from high school. We are the only nation in the world that aspires to do that. We wrote a law, No Child Left Behind. Have you all heard that? And it just got reauthorized as the Every Student Succeeds Act. But that law, No Child Left Behind, when it was written, said this, clearly said this. By 2014, every child in America, 100% of America's children will pass rigorous state tests to prove that they're learning. Now listen, in the history of mankind, no system of education, public, private, or otherwise, has ever aspired to create a system of rigorous standardized testing that every single child would pass. It was a marvelous metaphor for our aspirations for young people. It was completely unrealistic. It never worked, and we've granted waivers for the last decade because it will never work on a spectrum of children that you can expect every person. Do you all know anybody in any organization where you would expect every single person to be highly successful at the most rigorous application in that organization? In Rotary. It doesn't mean we don't aspire to it. It doesn't mean we don't aspire to it. And I will tell you, in our school systems here in Hampton Roads, there are many, many wonderful things that are happening that are helping children attain those goals. In Virginia Beach, our graduation rate stands at nearly 90%. Throughout the region, it stands at nearly 90%, a little bit higher in some, a little bit lower in others, but on average at 90%, that's our graduation rate. Our dropout rate's incredibly low. We do good work for young people. And so I want to make that case with you all before I do anything else. But I do want to acknowledge that there are also challenges in our systems. So we are, in my estimation, a system that was designed to sort and select children for good reasons. So public education in its current iteration was designed in the industrial age. And it was designed to create managers and workers. And it was designed to sort and select children. And it was designed to lift up the cream of the crop and send them to college. And it was designed to prepare everybody else to read the drill press. Minimum basic literacy skills, basic math skills. 1960s, you all know what happened in the 1960s, late 50s with Sputnik, and then the press for science and math. But even then, in the system, the expectation wasn't that everybody would become an engineer or a scientist. It was that the cream of the crop would become engineers and scientists. And the system has sort of remained that way for a long time. In the 80s, there was a report that came out. It was called A Nation at Risk, and it fired a lot of people up, including our governors, who got together in the 90s and established a series of goals for public education. And in the 80s and 90s is when we really began to have the conversation that really all children need to be educated at a high level. It can't be some children. In fact, the No Child Left Behind Act did another thing that had never been done before. It said you have to report your data by subgroup. Have you ever heard the term subgroup in education? I don't like to talk about subgroups because I don't like telling people you're part of a subgroup. It seems strange. But from a technical reporting standpoint, we report data, we disaggregate our data and we report out by ethnicity, so African American, white, Asian, Hispanic. We report out by gender, we report out by special needs, we report out by socioeconomic status, so students who are economically disadvantaged we report on. And so that law shed an incredible spotlight on the disparities in our public education system. And what we found out overnight in the 80s and 90s was that America is not serving all children well. It serves children of affluence incredibly well in its education system. It serves white children very well. But children of color, children who don't speak English as a first language, children with disabilities are not served as well in our public school systems. That remains a problem today. We talk about it as an achievement gap. Have you heard that term? Mm-hmm. And the achievement gap in the historical context is the difference between our highest performing group of students and our lowest performing group of students. We're trying to reframe that conversation as the difference between our expectations for all students and how each child is performing against that standard. But right now we compare student groups. And we talk about the difference between how our white students perform and our black students perform, how our affluent students or non-poverty students perform and our poorest students perform. And there are always differences, large differences, and they always fall along three lines. And they are students of color perform less well than their peers, students who speak, students with special needs, and that would be students with disabilities, and students who speak a second language or as their native language, and then students from poverty do not perform as well as their non-poverty peers. And that is a challenge in Virginia Beach. It's an incredible challenge, certainly here in Norfolk, but it's also a challenge across the nation. So it is the reason I say that the system that we built was not necessarily designed to deal with that challenge. Because it was built as a sorting and selecting system, and it's done a pretty remarkable job of doing that. So as we move forward, our key challenges, in my estimation, in public education, and certainly in Virginia Beach, are these, and then I'll wrap it up and I can answer your questions. Number one, we've got to close those gaps. We have to do a better job educating every child. And we are getting better at that work because we're talking about that work. We also need to make sure, I think you all would agree with this, that every child can read and write at a high level when they leave us. Would anybody disagree with that as a goal?
Yeah.
You're not going to disagree with that, right? You think they should, right? Santa, don't be bad Santa. I'm sorry. Sometimes I can't help it. I'm on the naughty list. I'm getting cold. I get it. You know, when I got to Virginia Beach, and this is not all that unusual in terms of my experience in other districts. Actually, it's pretty good in terms of my experience in other districts. What I found out from the best data that I have is roughly 25 to 30% of our young people are not reading on grade level. Roughly 25 to 30%. Now, that doesn't mean they're illiterate. So I want to be clear about that. It just means they're not reading on grade level. It means a 9th grader might be reading on a 6th grade level. It means maybe a 3rd grader could be reading on a 1st grade level. And what that means in our classrooms is really interesting. Are you cutting me off? Is that what you're...
Not yet, but we're working on it.
Okay, all right. Is that we have children, and I'll just give you a quick example, that in kindergarten, we have children who come into our kindergarten classrooms who, some of whom are already reading, and some of whom, if you give them a book without pictures, don't know how to hold it because they can't orient text. They've never seen text. And we deal with those issues as we go through our schooling. So literacy, huge challenge. Math, huge challenge. You all talked about technology, huge challenge. How do we deal with introducing technology into our classrooms so that our students learn to use those tools the way they'll be asked to use them in the world? And many other challenges, but I'm going to start answering questions.
And before you do it, Dr. Spence, if I may, for 30 seconds, we need a runoff between Charlie and Winifred. Take a piece of paper off the scratch pad in front of you, put one name on it, we'll collect those. Thank you very much.
Certainly.
I'll make it easy for you. I'll withdraw my name.
Nope, we're going to do it now. Wait.
No, Charlie, we can't do that.
That's unacceptable, Charlie.
We need you.
Trish?
I just want to applaud you and applaud the administration for its change in attitude. In '76, I came here and worked as a school psychologist in the city of Virginia Beach. And the chief psychologist told us, all the resource teachers and the school psychologists, he said, if you think that you're here to be a child advocate, you need to look at your paycheck, see whose name is on it. that was, to me, that was like, what? And that attitude has totally changed, and thank God for that.
Yes, thank you. You want to call or you want me to call? Yes, sir.
I heard, I shouldn't say heard, I saw on Google the other day that 99.6% of the Rotarians in North Carolina, when they move to Virginia, they join a local club.
And Dr. Spence, if I could add to that, we would very much like you to consider this as your new Rotary Club.
Well, I appreciate
And
that.
while I've got the floor, thank you so much for your remarks, and then I'm going to back to questions. Please accept this token of our
That's great. Thank you
great
very
pleasure to
much.
have you with us. I'm sure there are questions.
Yes, ma'am, in the back.
I would, I guess, make the statement that I think that the same divide and the achievement gaps have existed in our country's education system for a very long time.
Yes.
And what we see, at least my child enrolled in kindergarten at Newcastle Elementary, had a great experience. But what I see at that school in particular is parent volunteerism, active involvement from the community, grandparents getting involved. And as we know, that doesn't happen in all of our schools.
No, it doesn't.
So it's what is your challenge to the community, if you will, and how are you all communicating that out to us, to people who may not have a child in school any longer, but let your child read. My volunteers come in my child's class all the time, and she reads to them.
Right.
So what can we do in the community? What's your challenge to us to do that for some of the schools, especially who don't have that kind of parent involvement?
Well, what this club does is a perfect example of what you can do, right? And so
Right.
being involved in the schools, reading with children, having children read to you, some of those things are critically important. Being a mentor, we're always seeking mentors. We have an entire department that is dedicated to community engagement. And they're wonderful. They're run by a woman named Laura Smart, and she has on our website a volunteer opportunity site where if you're interested in volunteering, you can go to that site and all the opportunities are there, and you can just say, I want to do this, and she gets with you and we do some training, and then you have the opportunity to get into our schools. But it is an incredible challenge. People are busy. In our poorest communities, it's very hard to get our parents into our schools, and it isn't because they don't like school, it's because they're working, and it is difficult to come to school in the workday, and sometimes working 2 or 3 jobs, and so it's difficult to come to school at night. Or they're staying home to take care of children because they can't afford childcare, and so they can't just come to school. And so there are lots of reasons that we don't have parent involvement. Our fundamental stand on that is, one, parent involvement makes a difference. We want it. We're going to keep working at it. But 2, we can't let that be the excuse for not educating the child.
I can step in again. We've got 2 items of business. I'm going to close the meeting, and will you be available
I'm
for
available.
questions? Pick a little red piece
I
of
get to be the
paper.
bad guy.
And the
Now you're getting
last-
You got yours last week.
99%.
You got yours last week.
All right, the last 3 numbers are 763.
763.
Did I pick a winner? Did I pick a winner?
763. He's looking. He's looking.
763.
Oh, I got it.
Oh, there we go.
Man, I have 76.
Second item of business. Don, do you have a resolution on the runoff?
Yes, the winner of the runoff is Winifred. All right.
We stand adjourned.
There you are.